Welcome to this introduction to the object project. So to start off with, we need to sort of look at the way that objects have been depicted within contemporary art, or in this case, contemporary photography. So obviously we have the found object. You can find work by the artists such as Keith Arnott, Ishuichi and Tamatsu. There's many other artists, but many photographers do use this process as a way to document found, or in some instances, objects that are incredibly significant to individuals or to the world in general. The next that you find in terms of the object is the deconstructed object. And Todd McClellan is an artist that really does look at deconstructing sort of everyday objects and documenting that deconstruction. We then also have the analysis, so the object analysis. This is something that we're going to be focusing on today. And there's many artists, especially artists from the Surrealist movement, really did sort of look at object analysis in quite in depth during the sort of 1930s and onwards. And then we have the placed object, and this is something that you have all done up to now with the object for a walk, that idea of taking an object and placing it out of its context and giving it new meaning. So when we talk about the object project, these are going to be the four areas that we are going to be looking into. But today we are just going to focus on the object analysis. So here's some artists that look at this work. That look at object analysis within their work. So first of all, it's the work of Emmanuel Suges. So what's quite interesting about his work is he does a lot of still life and using photography as a way to document the still life at the time. So this was sort of at the beginning of the 20th century. He was a painter and did a lot of paintings of still lifes, and then he left painting behind and decided to just concentrate on using photography as a process to record these still lifes. And what's very beautiful about his work is, especially this particular piece, what I love about this is the way that the shadow sort of morphs itself into the actual reel of film itself. Looking at it, you can see that the composition has been very carefully considered, yet there's something very freeing about the composition as well. If we move on to another one of his works, here you can see we have playing cards that are stacked up. Again, composition has been very carefully considered here, even to the layout of the cards themselves. You can see that he's been using a pattern in the way that he's laid some cards face up and some cards face down. But again, light is playing a really key role in this. That idea of these shards of like the light and the shadow going across the object is very, very beautiful. And that was something that Emmanuel Suges was renowned for, really, these beautiful still lifes that he created. But light played a massive part within his work and creating these really dynamic shadows that in some cases blended into the objects themselves. So the next artist I'm going to look at is André Kertész. Now, no doubt you'll have heard of Kertész before now. He was never actually formally a member of the Surrealist movement, but his work in distortion is often regarded as some of the best work during that period. Now, his most famous work, I say most famous, he's probably more renowned for his distorted figure work, but arguably this is one of his most famous photographs, and it's called The Melancholy Tulip. Now, I know what you're thinking, Laura, why are you showing us why are you saying this bit? Because this is a very, very significant piece of work. And looking at it, you can see there is a level of distortion in the centre. But, many have regarded this as almost autobiographical, really, of his time in New York. Many believe that sort of the mood of this piece, being, quite melancholy, was his sort of feeling at the time, the head of the tulip sort of being like hanging and suspended sort of in midair. And then we have the distortion of the stem of the tulip in the vase. So this, yes, it is obviously object analysis, but this is far more than just a photograph of a tulip in what appears to be a vase. It does go far. It goes further than that, and really does delve into the different types of mood that these photographs can create. We're now going to look at the work of Jeremiah Funk. So what's quite interesting about Jeremiah Funk's approach to object analysis is actually the majority of the time the objects that are being depicted are not in the frame. So in this one, you can see in the bottom right hand corner, we've got one of the objects. It's like a silver hook. But the other objects that we can see the shadow of are outside of the frame and outside of the view. This box of light that he creates, he uses mirrors and things like that to bounce his studio lights off mirrors, and that's what creates these beautiful boxes of light. But again, how interesting that he focuses purely on the shadow that the object creates. They do have a very surrealist feeling and vibe about them, don't they? The images are fairly distorted, but this is still classed as an object analysis. And his use of studio lights, it's really exciting. It's, you've got to imagine these were being produced at the beginning of the 20th century, so no one had seen a photograph like this before. Then we have the work of Man Ray. I'm sure some of you have heard of Man Ray before. He was heavily involved in the Surrealist movement, and he did a range of photographs that depicted objects. Obviously as well, he was later involved in the Dada movement, so the idea of the ready-made, using photographs as a way to document some of those ready-made sculptures that the Dadaists created. He was one of the photographers for them. So you can see here we have an egg slicer that's placed on its side. And again, look at the shadow, look at the use of the studio light. That shadow sort of blending into the object. Which is the object and which is the shadow? There's something, again, very, very beautiful about this particular piece. There really is an exploration of the objects when they come to analyse them. And then here we have one of his photograms. Now the process itself is called a photogram, and it is something that we are going to be looking at just after Christmas. We're going to be going into the darkroom to create these, and they're basically cameraless photographs. And this particular piece is actually a depiction of a rolled up piece of paper. But you'll see there I've put photogram, but then put a rayograph by the side of it, because Man Ray believed that he actually created this process himself, and he didn't. He wasn't the first person to use this process at all. So you may find that when you're researching about Man Ray, if it is that you're looking for the photogram, actually you might find that they're called rayographs because he sort of penned that title, but they are photograms, not rayographs really. Or Laszlo Moholy-Nagy. And again, these are photograms, cameraless images, and we've got the outline of the objects here. And I suppose, looking at the work of these artists, it's interesting how they each have responded to analysing objects, looking at form, looking at shadow, and in some areas looking at the texture as well of the object, and the material of the object is very important. And that's what you're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks. So what I'd like you to do today, please, is I'd like you to create a 4 to 6 pages of research for the gallery research section on your website. Those of you that started this the other day, just add a couple of extra names from this keynote. And from there, you are going to select 2 of those artists that I've discussed today, and you're going to produce a critical link, but 1 page on each of the artists. And I do want to stress, these artists do explore other areas within the work. So it's make sure the examples that you're using for the artists are of the objects. So for example, if you're going to look at André Kertész, make sure it's his object work and not his distorted figure work. It needs to relate to the theme of the project. So please make sure it's the objects that you focus on. And then in Monday's lesson, we will begin photographing a range of objects with this view of the object analysis. So looking at lighting, looking, at using studio lighting and how we can document every aspect of these objects. Now, I'm going to be selecting the objects for you. I'm sure you'll be very excited about it. And in small groups, we're going to be going into Nancy's room and taking some photographs in like a studio setup. So very similar to things like this, looking at form, looking at texture, and looking at shadow as well. So please today, start that gallery research for me. If you've done that, continue on with the object analysis critical link. And remember, 1 page on each artist for that one. Any questions, just message me on Teams. And apologies again for today. There's no support session tomorrow, so I will see you hopefully on Monday. Okay, thank you everybody.